Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about desktop applications. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, why are there so few desktop applications compared to mobile and web applications? Money, usually. That's the simple answer. Let me explain that a little bit. So the software that most people consume has a very specific purpose, and the simple purpose is to generate revenue somehow for someone somewhere, or be an enjoyable experience or so forth. And customer satisfaction is usually the main focus for people, but there's also a side note to that, which is the fact that when you're dealing with a mobile app, usually the focus is, well, you want convenience. Web is a similar sort of beast where it's a matter of convenience, because it's usually easier for a person, or like it's a platform that is already established, where searching for information and finding like discoverability. I usually make the argument, if you compare the case for mobile versus web, the trend that I've always seen, at least from the reports that I look at, is that the web is a place of discovery. This is where you find information, you discover new system, like new products or companies or so forth and so forth, to inform yourself. Mobile is a more established platform where, if you in terms of, if you have a recurring event, something that, like for example, you have a chatting system, or like in social media or something like that, that requires a continued use. Most people prefer to install an app on their phone because they can carry that thing with them, and it's usually something that it's an established habit, if that makes sense. But when it comes to desktop, well, the desktop application, it used to be the case that you installed software on your computer, and that was sort of the end of it, right? You had some type of shippable product. But more and more companies are trying to go from using desktop applications to using either mobile or web. And one of the main reasons behind that is that, well, as it's proven to be extremely difficult for desktop application systems to prevent exploitation of their software, because you're basically putting you're almost always, unless you have a subscription type of thing, right? You're putting something on somebody else's computer, and that can be exploited. The crackers of the world will be able to tell you that almost as soon as a new game comes out or something like that, there are people who are going to try to exploit the software, and create like free versions or cracked versions of that software. That's one part of it. But another part of it, which is also very important, I think, to remember, is that one big factor that makes the web a success is that the web is only providing you, depending on, of course, how you destruct your code, but ideally the web application is only going to present to the user an interface to interact with the system. But all the business logic, everything that is sort of corporate company, its intellectual property, that is still protected on the servers, and you can also scale those servers in a very efficient way usually. So, I mean, if your system grows and you have more and more user systems, it's a way. It basically becomes easy for you to protect your own property and scale the system at the same time. Now, a lot of desktop applications definitely have it is a web application. So they're basically just a client for some type of web server somewhere. But then we come to the last thing, which is sort of, if you already need, because most people, I would say, agree on that there are two main devices that you have to cover as an IT product: mobile and web. Those two platforms are the main platforms for consumption in the entire world, which means that for a desktop application to make sense, you sort of have to, and which is the case for them usually, you sort of have to have a use case for leveraging the performance of a desktop, for example, because it's not like nobody uses desktop applications, there's tons of them, but how do you motivate it? Because if you can make something for web, you're actually going to save on development cost, because usually you have to have a web version of the thing that you're making. Not always, but it is, as I said, it's already a case, especially if you're making like a web shop or something like that, then there's a very, very good reason to do so. So why would you make the desktop application and the web application? Because it's basically two applications. You can do the Slack thing where you're basically creating all things in the web, and then you're using something like Electron or similar sorts of solutions to provide a desktop experience as well. That's also very feasible. But I hope that that this makes sense to you. The main reason is usually down to that you need web and you need mobile, but you don't always need a desktop application to do whatever it is that you want to do with your product. And the desktop application is it's actually more it presents a bigger risk to your business than using, say, just web or just mobile. So what I want you to take away from this is that I'm not in any way saying that this is like the definitive answer why this happens, because I simply don't know. But what I can say is that what usually, at least I've seen, is that the desktop applications that we have, they're usually more geared towards either if you need to have some type of program that leverages computation power that you don't want to have on the web. But there are still web versions of the thing, if that makes sense. So an example would be things like Photoshop or video editing or things like that, where you're doing a lot of computation on videos or images or stuff like that. That may not be something that you want to have on the web, for example. It depends on how you structure it, of course, because of performance reasons, but it could also be that you don't want to, like as a company, you don't want to pay for the computation power of like image processing and stuff like that, when you could have just put that on the customer's system. But then, as I said, then you have that other problem, all right? Photoshop and systems like that, they're probably the number one cracked softwares of the world, where like they just have to understand that they're going to lose out on licensing fees in many cases, because they've sent all of the stuff that is needed in order to basically not pay them for their software to cyberspace, and that that there are people who have computers knowledge on cyberspace that know how to crack that sort of stuff. And when it comes to mobile and web, usually these are the two main platforms across the entire world, which means that even if you were to just say we're going to be desktop only, you at the very least need to have a web presence and in many cases a mobile presence. You can of course have a product like Photoshop, for example, and then like promote it on the web. But if you already have something like a web shop or something like that, then it's in many cases not really it makes no sense to have a desktop application when you could have just had a web application. Why would you do both? Because the cost of development now doubled for no good reason. So it's usually a trade-off between what does your product actually offer, and does it actually need to be installed on a user's computer, versus can you get away with using the web or mobile or something like that, because these things you sort of need, and they offer a lot of benefits that you don't really get with a desktop application. So you really have to understand your customer, and you have to understand this, like the product that you are selling, I would argue. Have a great day.